The vast ocean conceals countless secrets from us. Only 5 to 10% of the ocean has been explored. A myriad of mysteries may lie in the icy depths below. Because the uncertain waters are so remote, there have been many unsolved cases in which ships abundant with sailors have gone missing, never to be seen again. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 sea captains who disappeared at sea. Roald Amundsen. Roald Amundsen was a polar explorer during the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. He played a crucial role in the exploration of polar zones and was extremely successful until his disappearance. He was born into a family of ship owners to Jens Amundsen and Hannes Farquist. The family was sizable, with him being their 4th son. At 15, he read Sir John Franklin's narrative of polar expeditions, which shaped his entire future. Hannah, his mother, encouraged him to pursue the stable vocation of doctorhood, hoping that he would not follow the family tradition of becoming a sailor or trader at sea. For her sake, Roald agreed and attended university for a short amount of time until his mother passed away. Immediately, he dropped out of his studies to begin a new, exciting life on the waves, joining the Belgian Antarctic expedition as first mate. Adrien de Galichy led this expedition on the RV Belgica. The journey ended terribly as the Belgica got stuck in ice glaciers off the coast of Alexander Island, west of the Antarctic. The crew were subsequently unprepared for the winter which followed. Due to his medical knowledge, Roald Amundsen estimated that the American named Frederick Cook had likely saved them all from scurvy by hunting for animals and giving the crew the meat. When one cannot obtain citrus fruits, fresh meat from animals who produce their own vitamin C usually has just enough of it to prevent the horrid disease. This was a realization he would carry with him for the rest of his career. In 1903, Amundsen led the first expedition to traverse Canada's Northwest Passage. He took 6 men with him in a vessel named Joer, which had a small and shallow draft. The ship had a small 13-horsepower paraffin engine. The crew spent 2 winters at King William Island, where Amundsen learned about Arctic survival from the local Nitsilic Inuit population. Alongside this, he learned how to sledge dogs and use animal skins for warmth. The Zua cleared the Canadian Arctic archipelago on the 17th of August 1905, having to make a stop for the winter before journeying on to the Pacific coast. The nearest telegraph station was 800 kilometers away. Amundsen succeeded in wiring a message in December and went on to Nome in 1906. He was initiated into the American Antiquarian Society. During this time he learned he had a new king, Håkon VII, after the dissolution of Norway and Sweden's union. He sent him news of his successes and proclaimed his achievement of traversing the Northwest Passage to be a great achievement for Norway. The crew returned to Oslo in 1906, after almost 4 years. In 1909, Amundsen craved more adventure, alerting his crew that they would be heading to Antarctica, planning on exploring the Arctic basin, though he found it extremely difficult to raise the necessary funds. Regardless, he set out for the south in 1910. Amundsen and his men reached the Great Ice Barrier and set up camp called Framheim. For a while, they fared well in the freezing temperatures, with Amundsen using past experiences and Inuit knowledge to their advantage. They set out to reach the direct South Pole in October and achieved claiming the icy pole, naming their southern base Polheim and renaming the Antarctic plateau King Håkon VI's Plateau, and managed to safely return back to Framheim. His planning and skillful tactics were crucial in their accomplishment. In 1918, he set out on another expedition in a new ship, moored, which lasted until 1925. He wished to explore the smaller undiscovered areas of the Arctic Ocean. Amundsen wanted to freeze the moored into the ice caps, and this indeed happened but too well, and they became heavily trapped. This occurred multiple times, and they spent 2 winters frozen in ice. Amundsen broke his arm during this time and was attacked by polar bears and was of little assistance to his own men when hunting or slaying. The crew returned to Nome to fix the ship, but Amundsen's men abandoned him, furious that they had not achieved what they set out to do. Sometime afterwards, he ended up adopting 2 indigenous girls, 4-year-old Kakanita and Camilla. But 2 years later, he lost all his finances, sending the girls to stay with Camilla's father in eastern Russia. In 1923, he attempted to fly over the pole. Amundsen's aircraft was damaged and the journey had to be abandoned. In 1925, he accompanied Lincoln Ellsworth, taking a flying boat to go over to the north, but like the previous aircraft got too damaged to complete the travel. In 1926, Amundsen and 15 other men managed to cross the Arctic in their airship. After an extraordinary career and successful life, mysteriously disappeared on the 18th of June 1928 whilst flying over the Arctic on a rescue mission. Amundsen's flying boat never returned and he was never seen again, yet his legacy eternally remains. Gaspar and Miguel Cotirriel, at the dawn of the 1500s, two brotherly explorers went missing on their journeys. Gaspar and Miguel Cotirriel were the first amongst sailors and captains to travel the northeastern coast of America. The Cotirriel family were a noble Portuguese house. Gaspar was allegedly the more aggressive of the brothers. The right to lead an expedition to the North Atlantic as the king wished to control the Northwest Passage to India and Spice Islands. However, Fernandez did not take the grant immediately, so Gaspar took the chance and gained royal permission to set out on an expedition of his own in the summer of 1500. He took a trio of ships with him, funded by his noble family. Gaspar Cotirriel explored the shoreline of Greenland firstly. Meeting with the native population, the harsh winter icebergs caused him and his men to leave the land and return to Portugal in the winter of 1500. In May 1501, he set out on another expedition to discover the unknown lands in the northwest with his brother Miguel and landed in Labrador exploring the coast. Miguel returned home with 2 ships to report their wondrous discoveries after they went 600 miles inland, expecting Gaspar to return soon thereafter. When he didn't arrive, Miguel set out to find him on a rescue mission funded by the king with 3 ships in 1502. Gaspar Cotirriel mysteriously disappeared on the shores of Labrador seemingly overnight. Miguel's 3 ships ended up in New meeting up at the agreed place on the agreed day. Miguel's ship was never found, assumed lost at sea during a suspected storm. Concerned for the noble brothers, the king himself financed a 3rd rescue mission in 1503, banning their 3rd brother from going and instead sent a government official. The men were never found. Benjamin Briggs, Mary Celeste. The mystery of the Mary Celeste has been speculated upon for almost 3 centuries. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was uncovered on the coast of Portugal entirely devoid of any signs of life from the crew which once boarded it. Among the missing crew was Benjamin Briggs, the ship's captain and master mariner. The ship was still under sail and in almost pristine condition despite 1 lifeboat missing and no men on board. Sarah Briggs, Benjamin's wife, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia disappeared along with him, all presumed to have passed away. The Briggs bloodline carried the maritime passion in its veins. The ocean was Benjamin's whole world, which shaped him into an experienced sailor who knew the dangers of the sea, often sailing together with his brother Oliver Briggs. The master mariner was heavily faithful to God and married Sarah. In 1862, together they sailed all over Europe and had 2 children, including their eldest son Arthur Briggs. Oliver and Benjamin planned on purchasing a hardware store in New Bedford and giving up their sea legs, but in 1872 Benjamin bought a share in James Winchester's Mary Celeste, a merchant ship, and decided to do one last voyage before giving up their marine passion for good. It is tragically ironic that this was to be his final journey. Benjamin and Sarah's son Arthur survived, having been at his grandmother's during the time of the voyage, and the Briggs have living relatives. You will never know what fate became of these great explorers. Despite the pessimistic nature of their disappearances, the missing rowboat on Mary Celeste leaves the hope that the crew, and if not at least the Briggs family, survived and settled elsewhere. Perhaps the Cotirriel brothers let go of their noble bloodline and chose to live amongst the natives of Labrador. Maybe Roald Amundsen found something extraordinary and unimaginable in the skies as he flew over the Arctic, or perhaps they simply perished in the dangerous circumstances of their journeys. Whatever your theory may be, it changes not the fact that we may never truly get the satisfaction of uncovering what happened to these great men, but we can keep their memory and achievements. What do you make of these captains who disappeared at sea? Historians studying the long-distant past must piece together clues about past civilization from artifacts, artwork, and what documents and journals they can find from the period. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 interesting historical photos and the meanings behind them. Sophia Loren and Jane Mansfield. One of the most iconic pictures of old Hollywood is that of Sophia Loren giving Jane Mansfield a hard side eye during a dinner party. This infamous picture is considered one of the most well-known photographs of both actresses. It became an instant sensation following both Loren and Mansfield throughout their careers. In the 1950s, Sophia Loren surged in popularity on the big screen. The Italian actress was a top-tier celebrity in her home country and soon gained fame in the United States. After a few years of gaining notoriety in Europe, the West beckoned her to appear in their films. A party was held in her honor by Paramount Pictures in 1957 to welcome her into Hollywood. They threw a dinner event at Romanoff's, a restaurant in Beverly Hills. Loren and Mansfield were seated next to each other at this dinner, resulting in the famous photograph. Jane Mansfield was a rising Hollywood star at this point. She was dubbed as the next blonde bombshell after Marilyn Monroe. Mansfield was especially famous for her scandalous behavior and staged acts in front of paparazzi. At one time, she pretended to break her bathing suit top while in the pool when reporters were nearby, so that they would take photos of her topless and she would land on the front pages of magazines and newspapers. At the dinner party in question, Mansfield wore a backless dress with such a low-cut neckline. Loren later explained that the image of her side eye is precisely what everyone thought it to be. She was staring at Mansfield's chest, waiting for a wardrobe malfunction with her dress to occur. Loren was not angry or jealous of Mansfield as seen in other pictures taken that night. She was only concerned that the low top would reveal too much. Although Sophia Loren looks angry in the picture, the two actresses had no qualms or arguments with each other. They were quite friendly. Loren regrets the photograph and wishes it did not exist. She hates being associated with it and continuously refuses to sign it, despite many fans pleading. She rarely talks about the event and wishes to leave it behind in the past, especially after Mansfield passed away. Loren harbors no ill feelings toward the blonde, but merely focused on the dress for one photographed moment. The night, Loren and Mansfield might have been friendly and wanted to ignore the photograph, but it immediately went viral and has retained its fame ever since. Even now, it is still considered a marvel and one of Hollywood's most famous photographs. Young Nikola Tesla teaches girl how to swim. A photograph has been circulating the internet for years now. Many people describe it as an interesting picture taken of Nikola Tesla as a swimming instructor on the beach during his younger years. Almost every post on social media platforms captions the photo this way, despite it being wildly incorrect. Although they share many similar features, Tesla and the individual in the picture are not the same person. Nikola Tesla is an incredibly famous name that people all around the world recognize. He was a brilliant inventor and engineer that propelled 20th century technology forward. He was born in 1856 in what is now considered Croatia. He then moved to the United States and passed away in 1943 at the age of 86 in New York. Unfortunately, when he passed away, was poor and alone as he was incredibly reclusive and often kept to himself. He did not sell his patents and make a fortune, instead opting to share his knowledge with the general public. Tesla was a Serbian-American electrical engineer and the leading scientist of his time. He contributed dozens of technological breakthroughs such as rotating magnetic fields and alternating, but was most famous for his studies on electricity. Initially, he wanted to become a poet as he thoroughly enjoyed reading and writing. However, one day he received a zap by static electricity which completely transformed his life. Despite being only a small shock, it inspired him to study the workings of electricity. His desire to learn about technology and science caused by a tiny incident is what led him to become one of the world's most famous engineers. As one of the most well-known men in the world, Tesla's face is easily recognized. Due to this familiarity, people have incorrectly believed this photograph is of Tesla for many years. The picture in question is from 1898 and features a man lying on the beach across from a young woman. The Museum of the City of New York identified the man as a swimming instructor and the woman as a sunbathe. The picture was taken at Midland Beach in Staten Island. The man's resemblance to Tesla is uncanny due to the dark curly hair, mustache, and similar nose, leading many to assume Tesla also surprisingly found work as a swim coach. Although the features look similar, Nikola Tesla was in his 40s at the time this photograph was taken. He was much older than the young man on the beach, and viewers can easily differentiate him by his ears and hairline. Despite many false claims, Tesla was not a swim instructor. He was already a successful inventor in New York with multiple patents. Despite this not being a photograph of the famous engineer, it is often described as Nikola Tesla teaching a girl to swim. Unfortunately, no one knows the true identity of the man in the picture. Still, it probably is not that terrible to be mistaken for one of the most intelligent men in modern history. We want beer protest. One incredibly famous photograph from the 1900s displays a prohibition protest held in New Jersey. It shows a group of men holding picket signs as they march through a street, demanding the repeal of prohibition and the return of alcohol. Prohibition began in the United States in 1920 and lasted for more than a decade until 1933. It was a nationwide ban on the production, importation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. Many residents despised this ban, primarily immigrants from cultures that heavily consumed alcohol. They all felt that the government should not be able to dictate their alcohol consumption. Women made up the majority of Prohibition movement leaders and formed the Women's Temperance Union in the mid to late 1800s to start fighting alcohol consumption. They demanded the ban to protect themselves from their violent husbands. Women across the country and economic tiers were subjected to domestic abuse at the hands of their drunk husbands, although notably lower and middle-class marriages suffered more abuse. After work, men would go to the pubs together to get drunk, then return home and beat their wives. Prohibitionists campaigned against alcohol to protect women and families. Although prohibition was indeed despised by many Americans and instigated an entire bootlegging did lower the rates of violence against women. However, the number of gangs and criminal activity increased. Illegal activity soared as people became involved in underground alcohol sales. Some gangsters became incredibly wealthy during this period. Cities no longer had funds from alcohol taxes to support their police departments, so they struggled to contain and mitigate crime. There were more gangs than police officers in many cities. Unemployment due to the Great Depression also added to the stress and made things worse. For years, American citizens had been protesting against the alcohol ban with marches and parades. The famous photograph showcases labor union members marching through Broad Street in Newark, New Jersey. This protest occurred on October 30, 1931. It had been a decade of prohibition and bootlegging violence, so tensions were high, and citizens were frustrated. The working men carried banners and posters that read, "We want beer," a direct and clear message. More than 1,500 men participated in this protest as they marched through the main streets. Over 20 different labor unions took part in this demonstration. Scholars consider this event one of the largest staged protests in the country, with many other similar marches and demonstrations held across the different states. The most famous photograph was taken at night, but the march initially took place in the morning. They managed to protest throughout the entire day, from morning until evening, and gathered quite a crowd of onlookers. They were increasingly dissatisfied with the ban and wanted it revoked. This protest was only one of many that occurred during the decade-long ban. Another famous parade occurred the following year in New York, where almost 100,000 people joined in to ask the mayor to repeal the ban. They carried signs, waved flags, and even made floats. While both were impactful protests, it still took another year until the government finally lifted prohibition and permitted alcohol again. But what do you make of these interesting historical photographs and the meaning behind them? You ever stop to think about the interesting people and places we have caught on camera? Whilst photography has not been around for long, it's interesting to look back at historical images and see just how things played out. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look at interesting historical photographs. A French soldier wearing a prosthetic mask by Anna Coleman Ladd. The first photograph we're taking a look at begins with a trip back to the First World War. At that period of time, there were millions of soldiers and civilians that suffered extreme injuries. Many soldiers in particular were left with their bodies and faces disfigured, along with the psychological stress they'd endure for the rest of their lives. It was and feared judgment from their friends and families upon returning home when the war was over. At that time, surgery could be an option for some, but for many the injuries couldn't be surgically repaired. In those instances, they sought out portrait masks. If you're unfamiliar, portrait masks were first created by a sculptor from England, Captain Derwent Wood. Later, they were improved by an American sculptor by the name of Anna. She'd create masks based off of photos taken of the person prior to the injury. She used oil paints to help resemble former features of the person. An incredible amount of detail went into each mask. The first step was creating a cast of the person's damaged face. Then, after reviewing a number of photographs, Anna would get to work by building up the missing or disfigured part of the cast until the soldier approved and thought it looked as close to the old them as possible. After, she would create a latex mask of only the area that needed to be restored. This could be from only a small portion of the face, or as big as from the eye down. Once the latex mask had undergone a copper bath for 2 days, it would be ready to paint. Anna painted the masks while the men wore it, so she could get a better color match to their skin tones. When it came to the mouth, she would add a mustache if desired, and would put a great amount of detail into each one. She saw this as an opportunity to send the men home, looking as close to their previous selves as possible. To keep the masks in place, most men wore spectacles, but if they didn't want glasses, Anna was able to work around it and find a way to properly secure the mask. The masks only cost $18 at the time, largely due to the fact that Anna's services were donated by the Red Cross, but they eventually cut funding and she had to close her studio. It's truly remarkable to see what she was able to do with these masks. By looking back at photos and paying close attention to the person's injury, she was able to transform their appearance and help restore their self-confidence. Although Anna did an incredible job, it would be interesting to see the work plastic surgeons are doing for those with facial deformities. We've seen great advancements in procedures due to technology, so these portrait masks wouldn't be needed today. Regardless, it's amazing to see what was done with such little resources back then. A few photographs and Anna were able to create a masterpiece. Maurice Tillett, the man rumored to have inspired Shrek. If you've seen the movie Shrek, you may have wondered how they were able to come up with such a creature. What you may never have considered is that the character would be based on a real person, but how could that be? Maurice Tillett was a Frenchman who was born in 1903 and had a successful wrestling career in the 1930s and 40s. His friends once referred to him as Angel because of his fair. The name didn't last long. When Tillett turned 17 and was diagnosed with a hormonal disorder that caused increased bone growth. That means that his hands, feet, face, and other parts of his body would grow at a rapid rate and no one was sure what to do about it. He started to experience most of the swelling on his face and head, making him stand out in the crowd. Whilst he was best known for his wrestling, his career actually began in law. And he then turned to a career as an engineer for a few years. He met a professional wrestler that convinced him to join him, and when the Second World War began, he moved to the United States where he trained and competed. Due to his appearance, he was considered the freak of the ring, but he didn't let it get the best of him. Instead, he became one of the most popular wrestlers in Boston and ended up living past the projected 30 years of life that doctors had anticipated for those with his condition. Photos of Tillett during his growth spurt resurfaced, and many were shocked to later discover a close resemblance to Shrek's character. Does this mean that Shrek was based specifically off of Tiller? DreamWorks, the studio that released the movie, has never confirmed this rumor to be true. After taking a look at the historical image, it's difficult to believe that Shrek wasn't created after close examination of Tiller's appearance. As of right now, it doesn't look like they're about to share any details in regards to the rumor. We may never find out, but at the very least, Tiller is receiving the recognition he deserved for his boxing career and positive attitude throughout his lifetime. New England's Dark Day, our last interesting historical event, surrounds the mystery that's known as New England's Dark Day. This historical moment dates back to 1780, when New England had been experiencing one of the coldest winters. A week before the Dark Day happened, people noticed the sky had an unusual glow beneath the clouds. The clouds were also dark and heavy, with a reddish undertone to them. And a gloomy day, but ended up being a day that would go down in history. Light rain fell and the skies were covered with clouds. Once it hit around 8 or 9 a.m., people noticed that dark-tinted clouds suddenly blew in and covered the sun that was still rising. Fog and dark clouds continued to cover the sky, and at one point people began to have trouble differentiating between the ground and sky. Completing basic tasks became a challenge and people bought candles to eat lunch outside. This blackout was unlike anything New England had experienced before. Some tried to explain what was going on with biblical references, and almost everyone rushed to the nearest church to confess sins and pray. That evening was the darkest anyone had ever experienced, and once it passed, people started to investigate what had actually happened. Some chalked it up to a solar eclipse, while others pointed to forest fires. All we can look back on from the day is an artist's depiction of the mid-morning. When looking at the image, it's clear the sky was completely dark and unlike anything you'd see on a regular day. Experts continue to look for a reasonable answer, only eventually stumbling upon evidence in 2008 that it could explain what happened. The University of Missouri claims that wildfires from Canada are what likely caused New England's dark day. The black smoke from the fires in Canada would have traveled hundreds of miles into the United States. It's not often that we have a scientifically proven answer, but it did take quite a while to get there. With that being said, it gives us hope that we may discover answers to mysterious events, even if it happens to take thousands of years to get there. It's interesting to look back in time and see how past events have impacted the present day. The portrait masks are no longer needed. A man with a rare condition who was seen as strange may have been an inspiration between a hit movie from the early 2000s. Canadian wildfires were the culprit behind the darkest day New England has ever experienced. The world truly is an unusual place, but we can always create connections between past and present life, learning new things along the way. So what do you make of these interesting historical photographs and how they've impacted the future we live in today? What happens in the past does not always stay in the past. Archaeologists and historians are constantly unearthing artifacts, mysteries, and secrets of the past. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 particularly strange recent archaeological discoveries. 700-year-old toilets discovered. In 2014, archaeologists had the fortune, or perhaps in some other people's perspectives, the misfortune of unearthing not one, but 2 700-year-old toilets. With some deep introspection, archaeologists estimated that the toilets date back to the 14th century. The lavatories were found along Funen Island in Denmark. The lavatories do not resemble modern-day toilets by any means, which is expected. Rather, they take on the appearance of what appears to have been large barrels. Based off some inscriptions and residue, archaeologists have been able to form the conclusion that the barrels were not solely used as toilets. Rather, they had served another purpose prior to being transformed into a toilet. Some food residue was detected that indicates that the barrels were once used as a means of storing or transporting goods. Considering that the finds date back to the 14th century, the condition of the waste left behind in this toilet still gave off a very foul smell. However, in the archaeologists' eyes, this find was amazing, as it sheds light into the diets and lifestyles of Danish people at the time. Medieval sword contains cryptic code. In 1825, a mysterious sword was unearthed in River Witham in England that dated back to the 13th century. It now holds its place in the British Library and it is displayed as part of an exhibition on the Magna Carta. However, an air of mystery still looms above the sword. What made and still makes the sword mysterious to this day is not the sword itself, but rather the 18-lettered inscription along the blade. Although appearing as what seems to be, or at least resemble, English lettering, the sequence of the letters has left cryptographers, linguists, historians, archaeologists, scholars, and more simply baffled and estranged by what the lettering symbolizes and means. There has been some allusion made that it incorporates both a mixture of Latin and Greek, but nothing is exactly certain. There has also been a big question of where the sword originates from. There has been some debate of the sword having ties to the Vikings due to the nature of the fullers and pommel on the sword. A fuller is a term used in sword artistry and manufacturing that describes the grooves or indentations along the blade, whereas a pommel is the sword's hilt where one carries the sword by. The fact that the sword has not one but 2 fullers or grooves is what led to considerations of Viking origin. However, ultimately, the debate was evened out that the similarities to medieval European swords outweighed those of Viking swords. The pommel or hilt is shaped like a cross, which historians have gathered that must symbolize Christianity and thus may have been used as a means for defending and upholding the sanctity of the church. Some have also cued that perhaps the first three letters of the sequence NDX are an abbreviation that translates to a Latin phrasing, Nostrum Dominus Christ, where Nostrum Dominus translates to our Lord. Others have strayed from hypothesizing a religious meaning and have instead opted for a more secular opinion, citing that perhaps the message inlaid on the blade is some sort of battle cry, which would make perfect sense since swords were commonly used as battle weapons in that time era, so a message like that along the blade would certainly be befitting in that sense. But there also exists another opinion, this one perhaps being the most unsatisfying and maybe even disappointing opinion of all. It is predicted that the message may have no meaning, which would explain the trouble of trying to decipher the text. She's found in an Egyptian tomb is at least 3,200 years old. It is no secret that ancient Egyptians were known to produce pyramids and tombs as ways of preserving and housing the deceased, especially for individuals whom they held in high esteem and considered and designated as particularly respectable. Although the first thing that typically comes to mind when someone hears the word tombs is mummies, however, that is not the only finds one will encounter within a tomb. Often alongside with the carefully wrapped deceased corpse or mummy would also be other objects such as food, tools, clothing, jewelry, and even pets. This is due to the fact that it coincided with the beliefs pertaining to the afterlife that ancient Egyptians believed in and propagated. Instead of thinking of once you passed away as a stopping point, in the eyes of ancient was a continuation point. They preferred the belief of an afterlife to which passing away served as a doorway. They believed that the deceased souls would encompass a series of judgments before Osiris, whom they believed to be the god governing the afterlife. The deceased member would have to successfully pass to be awarded a paradise-like afterlife experience. This is also one of the reasons for the infamous magnificent inscriptions and illustrations found alongside the walls of tombs. Tombs were often erected far prior to the person passing away as a preparation for their impending inevitable conclusion on earth. This is precisely why so much thought and effort were placed into the tombs and how they were fashioned. The ancient Egyptians' views of the afterlife seem to have been the very reason why for one particular discovery in Thames' tomb. Dating back to the 13th century BC, Thames was an esteemed official governing in ancient Egyptian society. Due to his high rank and positioning, naturally a tomb was erected in his honor. His tomb was first discovered back in 1885, but ended up being unfortunately lost for 2 centuries due to strong sandstorms that masked the site. However, in 2010, archaeologists were once again reunited with his tomb site, and this time with much better luck as they have managed to do a better job of salvaging their finds. As thrilling as it was to come across Thames' tomb after what was thought to have been a discovery forever lost, there was something else about this tomb that stood out to archaeologists. As archaeologists were dusting sand off the artifacts they had found, they got their hands on one particular jar that appeared to have a great quantity of some type of mysterious residue. After some further analysis conducted to identify what the substance was, the results came back identifying it to be none other than cheese. This was a discovery that shed light into the diets of ancient Egyptians and simply the fact that they too ate and produced cheese as a delectable treat just as many of us of the modern day enjoy as well. The cheese was most likely made from either goat or sheep's milk. In its fresh form, it is predicted to have had somewhat of an acidic tinge taste-wise and a consistency that was soft and mushy and easy to spread. Not only did the analysis conducted on the cheese confirm that it is indeed cheese, but it also pinpointed the presence of a bacteria responsible for an infectious disease called brucellosis. Between old-age toilets, mysterious swords, and stale cheese intended as a sustenance for the deceased, it is a true fascination that such old artifacts managed to persevere through the odds of time. They also shed light on the similarities we share with our ancient predecessors that perhaps we did not think to consider prior. It leaves us to only wonder what mysteries and secrets of the past will be dug up next. What do you make of these unusual archaeological discoveries? What could lie beneath the murky waters of a deep, dark lake? Not just home for Scottish monsters and summer camp slasher films, lakes have had a surprising history of revealing hidden mysteries that were right under our noses. From forgotten artifacts to sunken treasures, a lake can potentially hide untold secrets down in their watery depths. So today, here at Unexplained Mysteries, we'll be taking a look through 3 interesting discoveries found in lakes across the Canadian Police investigate after 14th human foot, washes up on coastline. If you are familiar with unsolved mysteries and true crime stories, you might just have heard of the strange phenomenon of human feet washing up on coastlines around Canada's British Columbia. To make the story even stranger, these feet were all wearing running shoes and some of the bodies have never ever been found. This instance is actually the 14th such occurrence of feet washing ashore. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police made the discovery of the 14th foot, but the pattern first emerged in 2007 and has yet to be solved. This particular foot was discovered on Gabriola Island in the Strait of Georgia. According to the report by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, a man was walking on the island's beach before noticing a strange object. It looked like a foot inside a hiking boot which had become stuck inside a log jam, which is where a large number of logs blocks a flow of water. Some theorists have suggested that the feet are the result of accidents at sea such as shipwrecks or plane crashes. Another explanation is natural disasters such as tsunamis. Another more sinister theory is that it could be the work of organized crime groups or even the plot of a serial attacker. Some people have attempted to play pranks on law enforcement by adding phony shoes with fake human bones. We've had people put dog-foot skeletons in runners and leave them on the beach, said Barbara Clinton of the province's coroner's office. And somebody even used some old chicken bones. The Clinton suggested that the reason why all of the feet are wearing running shoes is because the light buoyant nature of the shoes allows the feet to float on the water surface. It also acts as a layer of protection from decomposition. A previous foot was found in a similar fashion on Vancouver Island. In December 2017, a dog walker found a shoe tangled in seaweed after his dog led him to it. That specific foot was identified as belonging to a 79-year-old man from Washington State, United States. That particular man was listed as missing but later found washed up. There is still no explanation for his passing of life. British Columbia Coroner's Office does not believe the feet are related to anything untoward. A number of the feet have been identified and the coroner states that the individuals who the feet belong to either passed away accidentally or ended their lives themselves. The feet then separate from the body due to decomposition, but their shoes protect the feet until they eventually wash ashore. Still, the story is yet to be solved, as are the identities of multiple owners of the Mungo man and woman. Ancient skeletons help us to piece together the long history of our ancestors and allow us to plot out the evolutionary timeline of our species. But no skeletons have garnered quite the attention from the scientific community like the Mungo man and Mungo woman. Found in the dry, deserted bed of the evaporated Lake Mungo, the discoveries were kick-started by Jim Bowler with the University of Melbourne in 1969. Lake Mungo is located in southeastern Australia and is around 760 kilometers or 470 miles due west of Sydney. The lake is also one of 17 included in the World Heritage Wallandra Lakes region. The lake dried up around 14,000 years ago, but it was in 1968 that the significance of the lake became clear when Jim Bowler managed to uncover the skeleton of an Aboriginal Australian woman. Carbon dating showed that the skeleton was 40,000 years old, making them the oldest remains to have ever been found in Australia, and demonstrating that humans had been on the continent for longer than we had originally believed. The bones of the Mungo woman were also burnt, which also makes the discovery the earliest known example of cremation and ceremonial burial anywhere in the world. The Mungo man was similarly found to have come from the same period as the previous skeleton. Since the massive discovery, even more human bones and cultural objects have been discovered in the crescent-shaped sand dunes of Lake Mungo. The reason why this area is so significant to archaeologists is because it offers a detailed fossil record of Aboriginal life in the region. Scientists are able to observe how people adapted to the changing climate of the day, as well as the drying of Lake Mungo. Some of the other archaeological finds include stone tools, food waste, and fireplaces. Amazingly, in 2003, a series of footprints left by the Wallandra people were discovered and were dated to being 20,000 years old. Today, the Mungo discoveries are an invaluable archaeological resource, as well as a significant cultural and spiritual. We can see that descendants from the country's original inhabitants, such as the Pikanji, Nyampa, and Muti people, have an intrinsic right and claim to the Australian continent. 8-year-old girl discovers Iron Age sword in Swedish lake. Like a story ripped from the mythos of King Arthur or the imagination of a young child, not many people expect to discover a sword lying in the waters of a lake. You can then imagine the surprise and excitement felt by 8-year-old Saga Venesek when she found an Iron Age sword sitting in the bottom of Lake Vidustern in Sweden. I like to walk around finding rocks and sticks in the water. And then I usually walk around with my hands and knees in the water and in the sand, Saga said. Whilst Saga was wading through the shallow waters of Lake Vidustern, she noticed a strange sensation under her. She was familiar with playing and crawling in the lake, and she quickly noticed that it felt different to the soft sand that she was normally used to. After reaching down beneath herself, Saga pulled up the object and took it to her father. "Dad, I found a sword," she said. Her father, while impressed with his daughter's discovery, suggested they be careful with the sword until they had authorities investigate it. "I'm not sure you should be touching it anymore," he said. "It looks fragile." Michael Nordstrom, head of the Cultural Heritage Department at the Jönköpings County Museum, was incredibly excited at the discovery made by young Saga. "Indeed an amazing story," he said. "We now believe that the sword is about 1,500 years old. According to the museum's investigations, the discovered sword is roughly 33 inches in length and is exceptionally well preserved. The sword is in such good condition that it still has its sheath, which is made from wood and leather." Additional searches in the lake also led to the discovery of some metal jewelry from around 300 to 400 AD. Why it has come to be there, we don't know, Nordstrom said of the sword, but perhaps it's a place of sacrifice. "At first we thought it could be graves situated nearby the lake, but we don't think that anymore." Speaking of her discovery, Saga said it was pretty cool and that it was exciting. "It's not that common that you find a sword that is 1,500 years old. But what do you make of these 3 bizarre water discoveries?" Stranger Things first hit our TV screens in 2016 with Netflix fans sitting down to enjoy a sci-fi series that engaged the masses. Whether you're rooted for these teen romances or watching for the action scenes, this series had something for everyone, including the scientists and conspiracy theorists among us. Whilst many shows have fan theories spouted from eagle-eyed viewers, far fewer hear direct confirmation that the speculation is true. Stranger Things creators Matt and Ross Duffer stated they wanted the supernatural element to be grounded in some way. So today, we will be looking into 3 strange scientific explanations and events that are based on real events. Project Stargate. Project Stargate was the discrete name given to a CIA mission aiming to develop psychic abilities, not unsimilar to those we see Eleven demonstrate throughout the Stranger Things series. This highly secretive project was carried out from 1978 until it could no longer be hidden in the 1990s. Stranger Things fans paying close attention will notice that the Stargate mission covers the 1983 time span we know Stranger Things is set in. This project looked into manufacturing the supernatural and manipulating the human mind into gaining psychic abilities to be used in the military and for spying purposes. One of the biggest focuses for this project was the psychoenergetics. This is described as a mental process in which, through heightened cognitive abilities, an individual is capable of changing the characteristics of an item, usually its position, without physically interacting with or touching the object. Throughout Stranger Things, we consistently see Eleven, also known as Elle, move items with her mind time and time again. The researchers on Project Stargate report having had partial success with telekinesis and remote viewing. With some limited success being seen, the CIA files seem to encourage the use of these psychic abilities, but only alongside and as an informant to more concrete evidence, decisively stating that this is not a definitive nor accurate enough to be a standalone, sole source of evidence. What has been dubbed remote viewing has earned its spot on the show too, as we see Elle tune into the conversations of the Russian spies in the series, accessing a conversation she is not physically present to hear. Stranger Things is not the first media piece to portray the Stargate project on screen, with the book and film The Men Who Stare at Goats also representing subjects being asked to look at animals in an attempt to destroy them. This film uses goats, whilst we see Elle asked to destroy a cat just by looking at it during her time in the Hawkins lab in Stranger Things. Whilst the project had ended in 1995 and information was declassified and available through National Archives, these files and documents only became accessible online as of 2017. Could there be people out there who truly have mastered the abilities we see 11 news throughout the series? Project MKUltra. Project MKUltra, otherwise referred to as the CIA Mind Control Program, is the name given to a series of experiments conducted upon humans by the CIA many of which were illegal, unethical, and dangerous, beginning in 1953 and lasting until the mid-1970s. The information gained from these investigations were designed to force participants to give confessions via mind control. Participants had their mental states and brain functions manipulated, many of which being unwitting and unknowing US and Canadian citizens, believing they were undergoing treatments for anxiety. Subjects were given high quantities of psychoactive substance alongside electroshocks, hypnosis, maltreatment, both verbal and sexual isolation, and as shown to us in Stranger Things, sensory deprivation. You might be asking at this point, where does this link into our favorite sci-fi show? Well, Stranger Things Season 1 has shown US Drive Brenner experimenting upon Eleven and her mother. The premise is that Elle's mom was an MKUltra test subject during her pregnancy, having been tortured with sensory deprivation and substance-related remedies. This horrific turmoil resulted in Eleven acquiring some unforeseen skills, the telekinetic and telepathic abilities we see her showcase throughout all 3 seasons so far. Nods to sensory deprivation are made continuously throughout Stranger Things, not just when we get the details of Elle's gripping backstory. Numerous times on screen, Elle uses a sensory deprivation tank to access, strengthen, and develop her psychokinetic gift. In the show, this lets her see into different dimensions, though it serves as a gesture to the pain her mother went through and the trauma very real MKUltra test subjects experienced. While this government information has been kept classified in real life, not the show, we have gained a gradual insight as the years have gone on and information has been less closely protected and even declassified. In 1973, CIA Director Richard Helms enforced that all files and documents from the MKUltra experiments were to be destroyed. In a surprising turn of events, 1977 revealed 20,000 remaining documents regarding the project, discovered through a request for the Freedom of Information Act. Surviving information was officially declassified in 2001, with gruesome details still being uncovered surrounding the project in late 2018. One letter declassified within 2018 told us that 6 dogs with brain implants had been controlled through a remote control, forced to run, turn and stop, with heavy implications for these plans to be transferred to humans. So why try and enforce mind control experiments at all? Allegedly, this was an attempt by the USA to gain an upper hand in the events of the Cold War. This has been largely confirmed, with Project MKUltra being a reactionary project, aiming to manufacture mind-controlling medicine to employ upon the Soviet Union, after claims circulated that the Soviet Union, China, and North Korea had used mind control techniques on American prisoners of war throughout the duration of the Korean War. The project was a product of paranoia and fear of communism, in a desperate, illegal, and truly evil attempt to create truth medicine or even sub-projects designed to erase memories. Though never carried out, detailed plans had been drawn up to make the project called Perfect Concussion by the US Navy. So whilst it is evident and plain to see, to us Stranger Things fans, that poor Eleven and her mother were subjected to true horrors, it is more disturbing to know that real Americans and Canadians underwent these same experiments in a corrupt attempt by the CIA to perfect mind control. The Montauk experiments, the Camp Hero base in Montauk, New York. The Montauk experiments are of a nature far more debated than those previous, with their existence being questioned time and time again, weaving a web of suspicions, accusations, and conspiracy theories. Regardless as to just how believable this set of studies truly is, their presence in Stranger Things is undeniable. Whispers of the Montauk experiments have begun to arise, since the 1980s, gradually gaining momentum. It is rumored that this project is a series of experiments carried out at the Camp Hero Air Force Base in Montauk, New York, and has encompassed research delving into the creation of psychological warfare and mysterious investigations such as time travel. This conspiracy was sparked when Preston Nichols and Stuart Swerdlow both gave confusing accounts, raising many questions and discussions about the events of Camp Hero. Both men said they had managed to regain and recover memories that had been repressed from their time being involved in the Montauk experiments, with Nichols even suggesting that he had been abducted and held against his will in order to encourage and enforce continued contribution to the research. Some of the events considered to have taken place at the Camp Hero base include time travel, teleportation, mind control, contact with alien life, and faked moon landing images. These claims have been documented in the book series The Montauk Project, written by Preston Nichols himself. This book has unsurprisingly been labeled as fictional, though this has not stopped avid believers and fans insisting there is some truth. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't remember time travel in Stranger Things. Alfred Belak, a man supposedly involved in the Montauk experiments, explains that the research into time travel consisted of a hole being torn open in hyperspace, confined to Montauk but allowing travel between 1983 and 1943. Belak warns that there was an ever-present threat of this hole engulfing the planet, one which could only be rectified by him and his brother destroying the equipment used. So whilst the Montauk project, should it really have ever existed, tore holes in space to travel through time, the Stranger Things gang sees a hole torn in space that threatens their hometown spreading through Hawkins. Belak's warnings about the Montauk experiment do not end here, though. He explains that his brother had begun to age rapidly as a side effect to this experiment and had to transfer the soul of Duncan to a new sibling's body. This bizarre story does not help the credibility of the Montauk hyperspace time travel as far as many are concerned. We may never know if the Montauk experiments were real, but the theories definitely impacted the show, with Stranger Things once having the proposed name of Montauk. Whether it will lead to space travel or the upside down, holes in hyperspace don't sound like a great idea. Whether you find these revelations to be exciting or terrifying, such a scientific and factual influence being present in this, frankly quite horrifying show, is certainly testament to what mankind is capable of, for better or for worse. But what do you make of these three experimental stories? Over 250,000 individuals are reported missing every year, with estimates of actual missing person cases that are left unreported pushing that total to more than 300,000. With that many reports, it's no wonder that a vast majority of these cases are left unsolved. In some of these cases, though, law enforcement are able to unravel the mystery of what happened to the individual. But if history has told us anything, it's that sometimes we should look closer to home when investigating these cases. The case of Brittany Gosney and her son only lasted for a few days. Brittany Gosney had approached authorities and reported that her 6-year-old son went missing. This was around the Ohio area. The fire was created on Sunday, but the story soon took a turn later on that day. Police were informed that the child wasn't actually missing, but rather something had gone down between the mother and child, whose name was James. After being tipped off, the officials made their way towards a lake, and once they reached here they soon started to make a sweep of the area, hoping that they wouldn't find anything. The officials said that as of right now, the boy has not been found. Shortly after this investigation, though, the officers started to unravel what had happened. According to court documents, Gosney told investigators with the Middletown Division of Police that she tried to drop off James out the rush from Park in Preble County on Friday. However, when he tried to get back in the car, she sped off. As if this wasn't bad enough, she then ran him over and dragged him for what was described as a long distance. She then left the scene but returned around 30 minutes later to inspect what happened. Once she arrived, she could see the young James was lying down in the parking lot with a head injury. The poor boy had passed away due to the injuries inflicted. According to a criminal complaint that was filed with the police station, the mother had put the boy in the van, took him back to their house, and then placed him in an upstairs bedroom. The next day, she and her boyfriend, 42-year-old James Hamilton, took a short trip out to the nearby river, where it's reported that they took out the young boy and placed him in the water. Both have been charged with tampering with evidence and murder. What's sad is that the Middletown Police Chief David Burke said the mother showed no remorse at this time and that they also haven't been able to establish a motive. 2 more children were found to be living in the household, but police have said they've been moved and placed somewhere else. The heartbreaking thing about this case is that many parents lose their children due to things that are out of their control. For example, many people go missing in things like national parks due to the environment, things they can't do anything about. But in this case, the mother went out of her way to cause harm to her son, knowing that she could easily overpower him due to her size and the fact she was using her car. This is one of those cases that could have been prevented. Another sad case is that of the Martin family disappearance. On December 7, 1958, Ken and Barbara Martin drove from their home in Portland, Oregon to Columbia Gorge in Hood River, Oregon. They went to look for a Christmas tree with their 3 daughters, 14-year-old Barbara, 12-year-old Virginia, and 10-year-old Sue. No one would ever see them alive again. According to reports, the family left their home around 1 p.m. Friends began calling the police when they didn't return after a while, but no one took the case right away. After a few days, police found a credit card receipt showing that Ken brought gas near the gorge. Based on tire drags, the Hood River sheriff believed that while trying to back up in the parking lot, they must have accidentally driven off the cliff into the Columbia River. Detective Walter Graven thought the family trips seemed odd, and he continued to investigate despite what the sheriff had concluded. While inspecting the tire tracks, he also found paint chips nearby. He sent the chips to be examined at an FBI crime lab, and they confirmed that the chips matched the Martins family car. Someone found a gun close by near a car that had been stolen and abandoned. Although they turned it over to the police, the gun was never used as evidence in the case. It was covered in blood, leading Graven to believe it was used to beat someone to death. Graven eventually connected the gun to the parents' son, 28-year-old Donald Martin, who was in the Navy at the time. Years before this, Donald had been accused of stealing a gun while working in a sporting goods store. It was believed that this was the gun that he supposedly stole in. Graven found out that Donald didn't have a great relationship with his family and that he'd never came back to Oregon to look for his family. Graven believed that Donald must have had something to do with the family's disappearance, because no one else seemed to have any motive. In May 1959, the bodies of Virginia and Sue were found floating in the river. According to the report, the death of both girls was caused by drowning. Virginia also had a hole in her head, which only led to more questions. Unfortunately, it was never confirmed what caused the hole. Donald didn't attend the memorial service, but he did meet with Detective Graven in June. He told Graven he didn't know of anyone who wanted to hurt his family, but that he didn't believe it couldn't have been an accident. The story stayed in the news for almost a year after the family's disappearance. Many investigators and journalists have tried to find out what happened, but no one has been successful. Graven has always said the case probably wouldn't be solved unless they could find the car and the other bodies. Before he died in 1988, he gave his notes to Jay Waterbury, who worked with the Dallas Police Department. Waterbury has hope that one day this case will be solved. What you make of these cases? The exploration of space has offered science some incredible new discoveries. So today we'll be taking a look at discoveries made in space. Mars is humming. The InSight rover landed on Mars in November 2018, landing near the equator of the Red Planet. NASA's robot has been measuring the planet's seismic activity and conducting tests on its geographic qualities. Its mission is to understand and learn about the geology of rocky planets to observe their evolution and gain some more understanding about Earth's history and potential future. Just from Earth, they need to gather information from others. InSight landed in the Elysium Planitia, a small crater located on a volcanic plain. This location is often caught in wind and dust storms. The data it has gathered so far suggests that the seismic activity and magnetic field on Mars are much stronger than the researchers estimated, about 10 times more. While collecting data, the rover recorded a strange humming sound that researchers and experts have not been able to concretely identify the cause of. They have their speculations, though, and suggest it is caused by both seismic movement below the surface as well as the wind above it. When combined together, these two forces create a strange sound. The hum actually cannot be heard by humans. It falls outside our frequency range but gets picked up on readings by the robot. And it's machines. So any future human visitors will not be able to hear Mars humming. The researchers are excited at finding so many similarities between Mars and Earth. The infrasound, sound we can't hear, and the atmospheric turbulence are encouraging to their studies on finding out Mars' history and seeing what its timeline looks like compared to ours. Interestingly enough, Earth also has a faint infrasound humming to it. There have been reports of a hum that have been a hot debate for many years, even outside the astronomy community. Scientists can't really explain it, but many people try to blame it for certain diseases and health issues. There have been many locations across Earth that have complained of some sort of noise pollution and mysterious humming sounds. Now, InSight has identified a similar one on Mars. The robot was using a seismometer to measure the quakes underneath the planet. Since its first reading, it has measured over 400 quakes. It even managed to find fault lines on Mars, which confirms the constant seismic activity found. A few of the quakes have registered at 3 to 4 magnitudes, but most of them were so small that the machines and scientists were unable to detect their origin. Researchers also found that there are more quakes on Mars when the planet gets cold. When it cools down, it contracts, which forces the brittle layers near the surface to break in a way to accommodate their positioning. This breaking is causing stress on the surface that results in quakes. There are still many mysteries that the InSight researchers are excited about delving into, like how they recorded some type of activity at Mars depth. They believe there might even be hot magma still at its core. They will continue to measure the activity and gather as much knowledge about Mars history as possible. NASA discovers hidden Kepler-1649c. A team of scientists recently discovered an exoplanet orbiting within the habitable zone of its star. This means that this Earth-sized planet sits in an area where it could potentially support liquid water. The team consists of transatlantic scientists working together as they go through old data from Kepler, NASA's space telescope that was retired in 2018. They decided to name this planet Kepler-1649c. The researchers had been searching through old observations to see if anything noteworthy was missed. As it turns out, the algorithm used to sort through the data misidentified this exoplanet and ultimately dismissed it. When scientists reviewed everything by hand, they recognized the signature and realized it was a planet. It is located about 300 light-years from Earth, and is more similar in size and temperature than any other exoplanet found by the telescope. They estimate that it receives about 75% of the amount of light from its star as the Earth does from the Sun. However, it orbits a red dwarf which is known for light flares and can make for a very challenging and dangerous environment on the planet. Could prove difficult for anything to survive there. With Kepler-1649c being only 1.06 times larger than our Earth, it was an exciting find for the team to see such a similar planet as ours among the stars. As researchers are still investigating the exoplanet, there remains much to be discovered. They have calculated an estimate on the temperature, but they don't know what its atmosphere is like, which can ultimately affect temperatures. It is difficult to measure things accurately from such far distances, so they can also be wrong about the size. Their calculations have large margins for error, so everything is mostly speculation at this point. Regardless, scientists are excited to see more rocky planets like this one because it gives them hope of finding other planets with habitable conditions for life. A year on Kepler-1649c is only about 19.5 Earth days because of how closely it orbits its star than we are to our Sun. Red dwarf suns are commonly found in our galaxy, so scientists are eager to see if there are more planets that they missed. In this exoplanet system, there is another rocky planet of equal size that orbits its star at half the distance that Kepler-1649c does. The researchers explain that these two planets are very similar to how Venus is half the distance to the Sun than Earth is. This solar system is incredibly interesting to scientists, as its data suggests it is very stable. They have found that for every 4 times the outer planet orbits its star, the inner planet does so 9 times. It has nearly exact counts every orbit, which indicates a very stable ratio in history. It is consistent and likely to continue for a long period. Its ratio is nearly perfect, which astronomers call an orbital resonance. Typically, they appear at 2 to 1 or 3 to 2 ratios, not 9 to 4. It is quite rare, which might be the result of a middle planet that they have not yet found. Although they looked for one, it might be too small or at a tilt that the Kepler transit method is unable to pick up. The scientists working through Kepler's data will continue to study this planet system and look for others that the computer might have missed. Kepler-1649c is just another Earth-sized planet that increases the evidence of potentially habitable rocky planets that can encourage life. There may be 300 million habitable planets in our galaxy. Late in 2020, NASA claimed that recent evidence and calculations suggest that our galaxy holds at least 300 million planets that could potentially harbor life, with the closest being 20 light-years away from Earth. A team of researchers used old observational data from the Kepler telescope, which scanned the Milky Way to find habitable worlds. From that data, the scientists found that about 50% of the Sun-like stars throughout our galaxy system have planets with environments and sizes that might be capable of holding liquid water. 4 of these planets are within 30 light-years from Earth. They calculate that as low as 7% of these stars would have habitable planets, which leads to their 300 million figure estimates. The experts say that it could even be as high as 75% chance, which would then reach up to 3 billion planets. NASA's Kepler Space Telescope operated for 9 years as it searched space for planets that orbit other stars. Its mission was only supposed to last 3 years, but it managed to conserve fuel so well that it stretched 3 gallons into 9 years of orbit. It confirmed about 2,662 planets in our galaxy and proved there were more planets than stars in it. It gathered so much data that researchers had to use a computer algorithm to try and sort through it all. The algorithm still made mistakes and identified many false positives, so teams are currently going through the observations by hand to check whether any planet was missed or incorrectly identified. The scientists narrowed their search to planets that were of similar size or at least half that of Earth. There are many factors that result in a planet being habitable, but overall it needs to be rocky. Any planets larger than Earth are usually gaseous. They also looked for stars that resembled our Sun in age and temperature and data from ESA's Gaia telescope to review the energy output of these individual stars. This data can inform them whether the star emits too much radiation or not enough energy to sustain life. They can then observe whether water is able to survive in liquid form on these planets. With Gaia's details on the stars within the galaxy cross-referencing Kepler's data, researchers plan to determine which stars and planets have an atmosphere that supports habitability. But what do you make of these 3 recent space discoveries? The Mars Perseverance rover has only been on Mars for a few days, but already people have claimed they've discovered very strange artifacts that NASA should investigate. The most recent one comes in the form of a shiny-looking artifact that could be seen off in the distance. Those who saw the image immediately started to speculate what it could be, with some saying that when you zoom in you can easily see a V-shaped object that's silver in color. Well, I've said this definitely doesn't look like it's a rock. Perseverance rover is currently NASA's largest and most advanced rover on Mars. And what's interesting is that it's already captured very strange artifacts. It's important to note that NASA and other officials have said there's never been a photograph on Mars they haven't been able to explain, and that those who say there's UFOs and other artifacts on the red planet are just seeing camera anomalies or strange-shaped rocks. Amateur researchers have said, though, this isn't the case, and that various photographs backs up their theories that something strange is happening on Mars. What caught many people's attention about these recent photographs, though, is the fact they don't need to be edited in order to see the anomalies. Previously, amateur researchers would have to edit and change the color of the Mars photographs in order to reveal these artifacts. But researchers don't need to do that with these recent images, and this is because they easily stand out. One person said the following about the image. What I find interesting about this is that this photograph has the red and orange filter applied to it. Yet you can clearly see what looks like a metallic-looking object. This tells us that whatever this thing is, it's easily able to stand out against the background. I personally believe there's artifacts on Mars that tell of a different story. Thousands of these images have been sent back to Earth, and people have done a great job at finding some strange things in the background. This is just the latest in a long list of anomalies to come from the rovers." End quote. Others have said that now Mars has various rovers on the Martian surface. Perhaps they should go over and investigate these artifacts and put a rest to any speculation. Those who looked closer at the image said that what we might be seeing could be the Perseverance's heat shield. This would have helped to protect the NASA's Perseverance rover during its landing. However, an official map that was uploaded to NASA's website shows that this is unlikely to be the case, as the heat shield and other parts of the landing system landed far away from the rover, and in the image we can see the strange object appears to be fairly close. Another person who said they were skeptical commented that the photograph is interesting, and said that although we can't jump to conclusions about what it is, it does seem to show what looks like a large silver V-shaped object. Researchers within the UFO community have said that V-shaped crafts are certainly nothing new and have been seen by people across the world for the last few decades. One of the most interesting cases that involved a V-shaped craft was that of the famous Phoenix lines, commonly referred to as the lights over Phoenix. It appears that there is overwhelming evidence of a mass sighting event of a large number of unidentified flying objects seen throughout the skies of the combined states of Arizona, Nevada, and the Mexican state of Sonora during the late 90s. According to a number of individual reports, the event seemed to have occurred on the 13th of March back in 1997, between the hours of 7:30 and 10:30, and detailed a wide number of witness reports claiming that several thousand people witnessed a triangular formation of lights that flew for more than 300 miles before disappearing. Due to the vast amount of UFO sightings that have been recorded here on Earth, it's caused some to say that it's very likely that these crafts may have visited other planets within our solar system, and with Mars being so close, amateur researchers have said they may have been there too. Nikola Tesla also spoke about Mars, in detailed and mysterious interaction that left him confused. Looking through the many letters that Nikola Tesla had written to friends and colleagues, they showed that the inventor had a firm belief in that of extraterrestrial life. This belief came from his rather interesting claims that he had engaged with radio communications with an alien civilization from the Martian service. That was sending him numbers and other brief messages for him to decode. The strange fact that led to the most credence surrounding this theory is that of Tesla's invention of the radio device, far before any other inventor was known the creation of such a device. This means that though Tesla would have been the first human to have created the radio, there were others well aware of the use of radio waves to communicate with Tesla when his device was first completed. Tesla wrote extensively in his notes that when he made the first radio capable of receiving and broadcasting a signal, as soon as he turned on the device, he could already hear another person's voice on the other side. He would later go on to claim that the people transmitting him a signal were those of beings living on the surface of Mars, and that they were attempting to make first contact with him. This was only made more eerie as Nikola Tesla wrote that this voice was that of a man, and he was calling out Tesla's name, saying Tesla 123 over and over again, before the signal cut out entirely. Many researchers speculate this signal could have been nothing more than background radiation misinterpreted by the inventor that was caused by solar winds of the sun. However, many believe that perhaps something far more creepy could have been going on in the background. No explanation for this strange occurrence has been provided. And still, many more speculate that perhaps Nikola Tesla made contact with something not quite human. So what do you make of this recent image captured by the Perseverance rover? Do you think it shows a V-shaped object? Do you think this could be a genuine artifact? Or do you think this is just a camera anomaly or a rug? Did you know that more than 80% of the ocean remains unexplored? That leaves plenty of room for lots of oceanic mysteries to uncover, from unsolved cases to discoveries. So today, we are going to look at 3 underwater occurrences and discoveries to see just how mysterious the deep blue can really be. Azores Underwater Pyramid Discovery. The first one we are going to look at is the Azores Underwater Pyramid Discovery. Pyramids have been built nearly everywhere in the world, with an eerie similarity and mystery already existing for those above ground. Those below ground are even more thought-provoking. The discovery was made right off the islands of San Miguel and Terceira in the Azores. Dioclesiano Silva, the man said to have discovered this, was on a fishing trip and using the ship's bathymetric equipment. He saw what appeared to be a perfectly geometric structure, making him question what exactly he was floating above. He noticed that the structure was a perfect pyramid. It's amazing because it forms a perfect pyramid. Moreover, orientation, deployment of the pyramid, the vertices are oriented north and south, just north and south. Such as Giza pyramids in Egypt, Silver told the Portuguese news website Terra. The pyramid is very obviously not a natural formation. The pyramid's age is supposedly 12,000 to 20,000 years old, dating all the way back to the last ice age, but little research has been put into the pyramid itself. Interestingly, the Portuguese Navy has dismissed the pyramid as a seamount based on old sonar readings in the area. No investigative team has actually gone to the site to check what this occurrence is truly all about. One of the admirals of the Navy, Admiral Fernando Pires, commander of the maritime zone of Azores, says there is not enough information about the pyramid to say what it really might be. He says that at the time the probes would be a danger to navigation and find nothing. Pires also says that the Navy is not ruling out the fact that this entire structure could have been caused by a volcanic eruption, making it a regular underwater land structure. However, no such research has been conducted and further probes have been shut down. There are no civilizations local or even remotely nearby the area that were traditionally pyramid-building societies. Archaeologists that did have the opportunity to excavate the area found an epigraph from due to governmental decisions and the Navy's overall skirting of the issue It's probably a good idea for researchers to accept their answer of this simply being a volcanic underwater structure. The sunken city of Cuba. A little over a decade ago, a team of explorers were working on an exploration and survey mission off the western coast of Cuba, when all of a sudden their sonar navigation equipment started picking up something absolutely bizarre. The technology was picking up a series of distinct stone structures lying 650 meters below the surface. The structures at first seemed remarkably similar to the desolate ocean floor. But upon further investigation, the structures were symmetrically organized stones similar to what you would find in an urban development. Of course, following this discovery, a media flurry soon began with headlines about the lost city of Atlantis being discovered in Cuba. With news coverage, these researchers also attracted the interest of the government, the National Geographic, and the National Museum, who promised to investigate the sonar images. Over a decade later, there is little research and no investigation to show for this unusual discovery. Pauline Zalitsky, a marine engineer, and her husband owned the company based out of Canada called Advanced Digital Communications. They were working on a survey mission in conjunction with the Cuban government off the coast of Cuba. Advanced Digital Communications were one of 4 firms working in a venture with Fidel Castro's government to explore Cuban waters. Their primary interest was finding treasure-laden shipwrecks from the Spanish colonial era. The team was using heavily advanced equipment to scan the area when they noticed these bizarre structures. Some of these structures were formed with smooth blocks and geometric shapes. Other blocks looked like they were being built into pyramid shapes, others were completely circular. Months later, they returned to the site with another geologist, Manuel Iturralde Veneno, head investigator from Cuba's Natural History Museum. Knowing what they would find in this area, they returned with the appropriate technology to examine and record the structures. The large blocks seemed to resemble granite and measured about 8 feet by 10 feet. The investigator from the museum said that if he had to explain this geologically, he would have a hard time coming up with an answer. The main piece of this that is so confusing is that it would have taken around 50,000 years for such structures to have sunk into the depth at which they were found. The catch is that 50,000 years ago there was not the archaeological capacity in any of the cultures we were aware of at the time to build such complex things. Despite such a media flurry, this story was soon buried and the site left unresearched. The quick dismissal of the story has led some to question whether or not there has been suppression of information regarding the finding. Whether the leads just went cold or this is something that we were not supposed to find, we might not ever know. Stonehenge in Norfolk, England. You probably have heard about Stonehenge, but have you heard of Stonehenge? Stonehenge was discovered in 1998 on a quiet and forgotten North Norfolk home beach. It is a 4,000-year-old Bronze Age timber circle that caused a huge amount of controversy both locally and nationally when English Heritage agreed to fund the Norfolk Archaeological Unit to remove the timbers from the beach rather than leave them. Stonehenge was dubbed by the media because of its close resemblance to Stonehenge in Wiltshire. It is a rather large tree stump buried upside down with its roots up. Surrounding the tree stump were 55 timber posts which had been cut from smaller oaks in the area. For 1,000 years ago, this beach was a salt marsh and not a sandy beach. Some say that the upturned tree stump was set that way so that bodies could be laid on top and birds could pick away at the flesh and bones. Over time, the sea has encroached on what used to be the salt marsh, covering the beds which were naturally preserving the timbers. The exact purpose of this circle has never quite been determined. The controversy over the structure was maybe more notable than the discovery itself. Many locals were completely frustrated when it was decided to lift the timber circle from the beach because they felt they had not been part of the important historical, didn't want it to end up being displayed somewhere popular like London. Some of the objectors, however, were not aware of the damage that the sea could cause to the timbers, which was actually one of the main reasons for removing it. People in favor and the Norfolk Wildlife Trust wanted to move the circle because it lay on the edge of the Dunes Nature Reserve, and they knew that the crowds of people visiting the site would cause great trouble to the wildlife and the surrounding land. The timbers did end up being excavated. It was a very time-consuming process because experts and researchers had to work within the restrictions of the tide levels. This allowed them 2 to 4 hours per day. Not to mention many protesters had taken too frequently to disturbing the excavators' work. Now that the work is complete, you can go to the Lynn Museum in Norfolk where they have the original upturned tree stump, some of the original timbers, and have crafted a life-size timber semicircle sea-henge replica to give you an idea of the original size of the discovery. You will not, however, find any remnants of this magnificent finding on the beach today. But what do you make of these three interesting ocean discoveries? Scientists announced on Friday that a huge iceberg broke off from the Brant ice shelf in Antarctica. The researchers have said this iceberg measures at just over 490 square miles, or 1,270 square kilometers. According to a statement from the British Antarctic Survey, they have said the huge chunk of ice is bigger than New York City. The British Antarctic Survey's Halley Research Station, which can be found on the Brant ice shelf, is currently closed. Researchers have said they've been conducting tests and that they've been waiting for the iceberg to break away for years. The scientists said that for the last few years huge cracks have formed. Photographs were taken from the sky and they showed just how far this crack spreads. The crack was actually widened to several hundred meters by researchers in the hopes that they could free it from the rest of the ice shell. British Antarctic Survey said the following: "Our teams at the British Antarctic Survey have been prepared for the carving of an iceberg from the Brant ice shelf for years. All the data are sent to Cambridge for analysis. So we know what's happening even in the Antarctic winter, when there's no staff at the station is pitch black and the temperatures fall below -50 degrees. End quote. The British Antarctic Service Director of Operations Simon Gerold said the following: "This is a dynamic situation. 4 years ago we moved Halley Research Station inland to ensure this would not be carried away when an iceberg eventually formed. That was a wise decision. Our job now is to keep a close eye on the situation and assess any potential impacts of the present carving on the remaining ice shelf. Change in the ice at Halley is a natural process, and there is no connection to the carving events seen on the Larsen C ice shelf, and no evidence that climate change has played a significant role. Over the coming weeks or months, the iceberg may move away, or it could run aground and remain close to the Brant ice shelf." End quote. Another worrying find was detailed by scientists who were working in and around Antarctica. After the invention of nuclear arms, concerns regarding the complete annihilation of ourselves and our planet have been a pressing concern for experts and government officials from around the world. Most academics regarding the matter believe that not only is the possibility incredibly high for nuclear warfare to occur within the next 100 years, but that we're even closer now to a nuclear strike than we've ever been before. Given the recent advancements made by powerhouses across the world, it's become an even bigger issue. Scientists have recently come forward with some worrying news. They have said that a potential dangerous time bomb is getting worse as the Earth's temperatures rise. What they're talking about is the radioactive fallout from nuclear meltdowns and weapon testings. After the tests were done, that wasn't the end of the test. Fallout then found its way into glaciers all across the world. Now, if these glaciers were to melt, which seems it's likely they will, it could mean that it might get released back into the atmosphere, and this could have massive effects. A team of scientists have been working together to try and figure out spots where the fallout could be. So far, they've managed to find nuclear fallout in the Antarctic, Iceland, the Alps, British Columbia, as well as Antarctica. And as you can imagine, they're starting to get worried. It doesn't help either that researchers have said that Antarctica is melting at an alarming rate. Researchers and scientists who have been mapping and studying Antarctica have come forward and said they've been noticing some strange warming effects. This is happening at times they wouldn't expect. For example, like winter. Recent studies have been released and suggest the planet is warming up. The scientists have said this warming in the Arctic and Antarctica have caused many strange events. One being melting and off-winter problems, including permafrost that never refroze this winter, and also wildlife deaths. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration released the following statement: "In our recent report, we stated this year was the second warmest year on record in the Arctic, and this came with many problems." End quote. The scientific team went on to say they found man-made radioactive materials at all 17 survey sites. The worry is that these glaciers and ice caps are melting. What then happens is it's released into the atmosphere and then falls back down to Earth, usually in the form of rain. What this means is it's then absorbed by plants and soil. Not just that, but a large bulk of it also finds its way into the oceans and rivers. This fallout can stay in the environment for a very long time. Interestingly, a recent study was done in Sweden, and they found that wild boar meat contained more than 10 times the safe levels of cesium. According to recent studies, Antarctica is now melting at triple the rate it did in 2007. And if this trend continues, thousands of coastal communities around the world will soon be underwater. Scientists have said that 10% of the inhabited land in the United States could be seriously flooded. In the last few years, flooding has become a major problem all around the world. One of the places being hit the most are areas around the United States. According to NAWA, it's projected that high flooding around the American coastlines this year will surpass typical levels of flooding by around 60%. This has scientists worried, as it was initially thought it wouldn't be as high as this. Within the next 30 years, it's estimated that around 300,000 homes with a combined value of $117 billion are likely to be at risk of chronic flooding. According to a new National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration statement, they said that coastal communities across the U.S. continued to see record-setting high tide flooding last year, forcing their residents and visitors to deal with flooded shorelines, streets, and basements, a trend that is expected to continue into 2021. The elevated water levels affected coastal communities, tourism, and crucial infrastructure like waste and stormwater systems. Scientists have said it's important that they conduct further research, but have said the future doesn't look bright unless we make drastic changes. So what do you make of these recent discoveries? There's an unending amount of mystery surrounding our oceans. As of 2018, the Ocean Service has said that over 80% of our ocean is unexplored. Although many have said that space is one of the last unexplored frontiers, the argument could be made that our oceans also make that list. After all, we've done a great job at mapping hard-to-reach regions on our planet, but haven't managed to research certain regions of our oceans. This has caused amateur researchers to use apps such as Google Earth in the hopes of finding something of interest. Every year people manage to capture strange photographs, leaving those who see them confused and wanting answers. Although the majority of these eventually get answers, there's a fair amount that remain a mystery. This interesting photo was recently shared to Facebook, and it shows a large structure that could be seen via Google Earth. However, the person who discovered it couldn't explain what they were looking at. At first, they thought the pattern may have been caused by something like a trawler boat. But it wasn't until they zoomed out they realized how big these lines were. The man said the following in his post: "I was having a look through Google Earth recently and noticed this strange pattern off the coast of Antarctica. It stood out to me because it didn't look like any of the natural features that were nearby. Something that surprised me as well is that I hardly had to zoom in to see this thing. I did a measurement and the structure is over 285 kilometers in length. I showed one of my friends who fishes and he said it doesn't match typical trawler patterns. I'm not someone who normally looks for this kind of stuff, but I found the image interesting and thought I'd share it. I'm hoping that someone can help me figure out what this thing is." End quote. This isn't the first time that these large structures have been discovered on Google Earth, and in the majority of cases they do turn out to be things such as trawler bones. However, when we compare these lines to those created by trawlers, there's a big difference. Those who saw the images noted that trawler ships typically leave behind wavy lines, as opposed to these straight parallel lines. Another person said that whatever this thing is, it appears to have some symmetry to it. And you don't usually see features like this in nature. They went on to note that after viewing the images, you can also see sharp turns and edges. This person said the following: "The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration may have been carrying out work in the area. Whatever this thing is, though, it's very big." End quote. Others compared this to a similar grid-like pattern that was discovered off the coast of Cyprus. Back in 2011, an interesting post was made by a user that noticed strange and unusual ocean floor grid patterns. This grid pattern appeared to span 60 miles in width and 65 miles in length and had numerous different right angles all across its formation. The post then goes on for several more paragraphs talking about how the carvings all throughout the area appear to be artificially created, with what is described as being similar to those of paved streets. Walkways and a number of smaller squares all throughout the region that also seemed to have 90-degree angle turns and looked like modern-day property laws. However, after years of people speculating that this could have been an ancient civilization among other things, Google worked the images from its database and said it was nothing of interest and that it had been created due to overlapping data sheets, and those who suggested it was Atlantis were looking too deep into this as mentioned. This isn't the first time that a strange discovery like this has been made. One idea that's been put forward is that these structures could actually be part of an underwater base. Underwater bases sounds like the work of fiction or something you'd hear in a movie, but the reality is there's many secret bases scattered across our planet, some of which the everyday public don't know about. Some amateur researchers have even said it's likely that governments do have underwater bases, and that this wouldn't be out of the scope due to the advantages they have. For example, recently there's been images captured of a Chinese submarine departing an underwater base, which revealed that the idea of underwater bases is very much a reality, and caused some to say that if China's done it, it's likely that other countries have too, or will follow in their footsteps. Then there's those people that suggest that underwater bases aren't built for or used by us, but rather they're being used by an advanced race that call this planet home. One of the most interesting underwater discoveries is that of the Malibu underwater base. This anomaly started to make headlines when it was first discovered, and that's because people labeled it as an underwater alien base. And this is one of those cases where you can understand why. At first glance, the object does look to resemble that of a building, with what appears to be large pillars holding up the bulk of the object. The discovery was made 6 miles off the coast of Point Dume in Malibu, California. The object pretty much sits on the seabed, looks to be oval in shape, and is pretty large. Google Earth images revealed that this object is in fact massive, measuring in at around 3 miles in length, having what appears to be pillars and even a large entrance. It's not hard to imagine why various theories have been put forward to try and explain it. According to various websites that look into UFOs, they suggest the massive structure is a UFO or a USO base. Many people have heard of unidentified flying objects, but many may not be aware of unidentified submerged objects. These are unidentified flying objects that are seen in and around oceans, with some people even claiming that they've seen these crafts enter the water without making a splash. It's not just random people who have reported seeing these crafts either. People in the military have seen these large crafts enter the water without making a sound, and even reported them staying under the water for several hours. It's these types of reports that have caused some to think that there's bases under our oceans, and that perhaps they could be part of something much bigger. However, not everyone agrees with the idea that this is linked to USOs, with David Swatchoff, the U.S. Geological Survey, coming forward and saying the following: "I didn't see anything special about it. I think it's because it looks like there's a flat surface, and then below it looks like there's these vertical columns, so somebody can say, oh look, it's the entrance to something special. There's no flag under the water that says I'm an entrance to an alien base. There's nothing unnatural looking about it. It's just showing some sort of variation in the offshore coastal morphology." End quote. What you make of this underwater structure? Australia is not just home to dangerous animals, it also has its fair share of mysterious locations. This leads to a wide variety of individuals living in such a location, completely isolated from the outside world and experiencing encounters no one has ever been through before. So today, we'll be taking a look at 3 interesting and mysterious places in Australia. Cahill's Crossing in Australia. Cahill's Crossing is considered the most dangerous water crossing location in all of Australia. It is infamous for the hundreds of saltwater crocodiles that hunt there. This feeding ground is located in the Northern Territory on the East Alligator River in the eastern section of Kakadu National Park. The crossing leads into Arnhem Land, which is an Aboriginal reserve. You need a permit to enter this land. It is only open during the dry season, typically May through October, as it is too dangerous during monsoon season. The crossing was named after Paddy Cahill, a buffalo hunter that lived from 1863 to 1923. He was one of the earliest Europeans to explore the region. During high tide, the crossing is submerged with water, which some people still try to cross. Their cars are often taken hostage by the strength of the current and depth of the water. Unfortunately, they start drifting away in crocodile-infested waters. There are many warning signs in place, but people don't often read or listen. Many do not pay attention to the tides and do not realize how quickly it changes. Despite the numerous amounts of people who have passed away and warning signs, people still visit the crossing every year. They want to be adventurous, but don't realize just how deadly it can be. In 2016, Australian rangers researched the area and did a survey on crocodile population. They found nearly 120 crocodiles just within 6 kilometers of the crossing. The crocodiles feed on the fish that travel upstream in the river as the tides change. There can be dozens of them at one time right on the crossing. Experts have said that for every crocodile that you can see, there's probably 7 out there that you can't. People come to the crossing as if it is some sort of entertainment or spectacle. They will bring their families and even wade out into the water to fish, ignoring the risk to their lives. Therefore, many people have passed away due to acting in this manner. In 1987, Kerry McLaughlin was fishing at the crossing with his friends. The 40-year-old man was foolishly standing too close trying to reel in some fish when a crocodile launched itself out of the water at him. McLaughlin was decapitated right in front of his friends. They actually took a picture of him in the water moments before he lost his life. Many people have passed away or gone missing while hanging out near the water or trying to cross. 3 friends attempted to cross the waters a few years ago. One of them disappeared and was later found by rangers in the stomach of a crocodile. Any attempt to cross should be thoroughly researched. The crossing is closed during the wet season from December to May due to too much rainfall, due to the water levels being too high, therefore making it unsafe to cross. It is best to cross during low tide in a 4-wheel drive car that has a high clearance. Otherwise, who knows the fate of the next person who decides to take a risk through this fatal crossing. The Black Mountain, known as Kaukajaka by the indigenous peoples living there, Black Mountain has its fair share of haunted stories and legends. This mountain is situated along the Trefethen Range in northern Queensland. It is made up of many giant granite boulders. Kaukajaka translates to spear and was named for the last battleground between the inland and coastal clans as they fought for hunting grounds, and is believed to be a place where devils and spirits wander about. The indigenous peoples in this area are taught to respect the mountain and actively avoid going there. They believe that you will get very sick if you visit it and that the spirits living there will torment you. The legends say that there are dark forces at work within the mountain, so they do not like when people visit it. Once settlers started arriving to colonize the lands in the 1800s, they also added onto these legends with their own experiences. Dozens of men have attempted to visit the mountain, but none ever made it back. Men, their horses, and entire herds of cattle have gone missing from this mountain. Infamous criminals ran into the mountain and caves to escape law enforcement and were never found, despite intensive searches of the surrounding areas. Even the trackers that were sent in to find missing people also disappeared. There was only one case of a police officer who returned, but he was so distraught and unhinged that he was unable to ever give a report on it. It is nicknamed the Bermuda Triangle of northern Queensland, as no one can fully explain what happens there. People who live nearby report eerie sounds that occur, especially during the night. When the wind blows through the rocks, it sounds like people or spirits screaming. When it rains and the rocks break down and fall, it sounds as if an explosion has just gone off. Some theories say that it is a man-made pyramid as it is located on one of the meridian points on our planet. In reality, it is just hard granite that was formed underneath the Earth's surface and was gradually exposed as the surface above it eroded. Weather shaped the rock into boulders and created deep fractures and cliffs. The dark color of the rock is also due to the blue-green algae that grows on it. Despite knowing how the rocks were formed, there is still no concrete explanation for all the missing persons. It is an extremely dangerous hike to get to the top of the mountain. It requires you to jump from rock to rock where any misstep can cause you to fall. The indigenous people dislike it when adventurers come to hike the mountain as they don't show any respect for it. If you want to visit it, you should take a guided tour led by the indigenous clans so that they can teach you about the cultural significance of it. Most people don't believe in the spirits that haunt the mountain, but they are still wary of the mountain. Some superstitions cannot be ignored. There is just something about Black Mountain that unnerves people. Mount Magnet Railway. Mount Magnet is an old gold rush town in Western Australia. It is named after the lonely hill that can be seen from the town. The hill has such a high iron count that it disrupted the settlers' compasses and rendered them useless. The town is situated about 6 hours northeast of Perth and has a desert-like environment. It barely receives any rainfall throughout the year. It was originally land belonging to the Battermire Aboriginals before it was colonized in the mid to late 1800s. Gold was first discovered in 1891 and it was plentiful. The entire area was littered with it. It was claimed that you could easily pick it up without having to dig and sift through tons of dirt. The town soon became a hotspot for the gold rush, as can be seen by its wide main street. The wider the main street was built, the busier and more populated the town was. They built mine shafts all over, most of which are closed, although mining still occurs here. The town itself is not as busy as it was in the early 1900s, but it still exists today, just with considerably less gold mining. It is mostly a town used for pastoral sheep stations. Hundreds of sheep are raised and herded through the land surrounding the town. While Mount Magnet seems just like an ordinary and harmless gold rush town, it actually has a fatal mystery that was never solved. During the early 1900s, a stranger came into town. No one knew who he was, but he was looking for French Maggie, a woman who lived there. Her house was situated at the very end of the railway yard. She also happened to live with two men who were supposedly just friends. The night the stranger visited her, loud arguments could be heard coming from her house. Neighbors claim it sounded like threatening outbursts and fights. The next morning, the three friends quickly left the house and disappeared from the town. They never returned and the stranger was nowhere to be seen. Months later, the body of the stranger was found in one of the abandoned mine shafts. Since French Maggie and her friends fled from the town, they could never fully solve the case. No one knows who the stranger was or why his life ended in such a brutal way. However, people still claim that his spirit still remains and haunts the railway yard near Maggie's house, where many believe that's where his life was taken. But what do you make of these mysterious places in Australia and the stories they hold? In recent years, there's been various individuals who have said they've time traveled. Time travel has been an obsession for many. Everyone from scientists to filmmakers have wondered if it was possible, and what it would look like if it really happened. Even the physicist Stephen Hawking argued that time travel was something we couldn't rule out. Although no concrete evidence has been found to prove that time travel was possible, many experts are still optimistic, and will likely remain this way until proven otherwise. A handful of people have come forward in recent times with their stories of traveling in time, and one of these was detailed by a man from Siberia who claimed he traveled to the year 4040. The unnamed man said he worked in a physics lab, where he was part of a team who worked to build a time machine. He said that the team was successful in building the time machine. Said he has to be careful not to reveal too many details. He said that once the project was complete, he was one of the first people to test it. He said he was able to travel to the year 4040 and that it had been pretty much taken over by robots. He detailed that much of the human population had been wiped out by the machines and that the majority of this was done in 2458. This was when humans had made contact with an advanced civilization after they got a response to one of their signals. The scientists went on to say these aliens easily outlived humans, being able to live to around 450 years on average. However, he said that these beings detailed that their species had just been involved in a massive war, one that wiped out the majority of their kind. Due to this, they searched the stars in order to find a place to colonize. The physicists said they tracked a signal that was sent out by Earth, and so made their way towards the planet. The scientists said that after these aliens arrived, everything rapidly improved for humans. Healthcare improved, meaning humans were overall more healthy and were able to live longer, and everyday life was easier on the human soul. But in 3213, humans and the aliens decided to collaborate and create a kind of superintelligence. He said that they created a huge computer that was around half the size of Europe. This computer was responsible for controlling every one of these robots. The scientists said though this computer outsmarted both humans and aliens, and when they were least expecting it turned on both their creators, telling the robots that the humans and the aliens were the enemy and that they needed to be destroyed. His story ends by saying that by the year 4040 pretty much everything on Earth was in ruins. Much of the population had been taken up by these superintelligent robots, and that it looked like nothing would return back to normal. The scientist said that he and his team then locked away the device that allowed them to travel to this time, and said that people need to take artificial intelligence more seriously. Noted that we've created our own downfall, and it's only a matter of time before they strike. These kinds of stories make for interesting reads, but as scientists and researchers have pointed out, there's no proof that they actually happened. They've never been contacted by Russian officials saying that they've created a time machine, nor has evidence been presented to back up what they're saying. This leads many to believe that they're just stories. Regardless, there's still some that believe they're real, and that we should listen instead of just writing them off. Interestingly, in some cases we have been able to put a face to those who've claimed time travel is real, and one of these individuals who's been vocal about time travel is that of Ron Mallett. An astrophysicist named Ron Mallett has dedicated a large portion of his life to studying the possibility of time travel. His interest in time travel began when he was 10 years old, and his father passed away after suffering from a heart attack. A year after his father's death, Mallett discovered the book The Time Traveler by H.G. Wells, and his life was changed forever. After becoming a professor at the University of Connecticut, Mallett began sharing his ideas of time travel and realized that many people were just as curious about the idea. This motivated him to continue his research. Mallett has determined several scientific equations and principles, and he now believes that not only is it possible to travel back in time, but he could even build a time machine to make it happen. According to a theory by Albert Einstein, objects that are large can bend space and time goes slower as gravity gets stronger. Based on this theory, Mallett believes that you can do more than just bend space, but that you can twist it. He believes that anything that can be done to space can be done to time as well. Mallett has come up with a theory, claiming that time can be twisted into a loop that would make time travel possible. He built his own prototype that shows how one could use lasers to achieve success. Mallett has said that studying ring lasers and their effects on gravity could help him figure out how to make a time machine based on a light that circulates. This light beam would potentially twist time and space and allow someone to travel to the past. Mallett also believes that if this light is twisted in just the right way, traveling to the future could be possible as well. Mallett's peers have been hesitant about his theories and find it hard to believe he will achieve his goals. An astrophysicist named Paul Stutter believes there's too many flaws in Mallett's theory and that it doesn't seem practical. Other scientists believe that even though Mallett's ideas aren't very practical, experimenting with them may be worthwhile. Mallett admits that his theory has its flaws and that it doesn't seem achievable at this moment. He has acknowledged the fact that time travel likely won't be possible in his lifetime, but he is trying to raise money to perform experiments. Regardless of the negative opinions of others, Mallett remains optimistic. He is glad that his work will contribute to the study of time travel, and he considers it a great tribute to his father. So what do you make of these interesting time travel stories? Do you think that anyone has ever been forward or backwards in time? Or do you think these are just stories? The RMS Titanic is one of the most famous ships still to this day, costing $7.5 million in 1912, which equates to $400 million in today's dollars to construct. On the deadly night of April 14, 1912, over 1,500 people lost their lives to the freezing cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. So today we'll be taking a look at Titanic facts and discoveries. Is this the iceberg that sank the Titanic? A rare photo that allegedly captured the beast of a berg that sank the RMS Titanic was recently appraised for a massive $10,000 to $15,000 at a recent auction. It is thought that the photo was snapped by Captain W. Wood of the SS Atenean, not far from where the ship collided with the infamous iceberg. However, whether or not this particular iceberg is the one that actually sank the Titanic remains under scrutiny. The photo, purportedly taken just 40 hours before the tragic impact on the night of the April 14, 1912, shows an iceberg with a jagged top. The photo carries an inscription that reads, "Iceberg taken by Captain Wood SS Etonian, April 12 at 4 p.m. 1913. The inscription states that the photo was taken by the captain of the SS Etonian not far from where the impact occurred and was, for some reason, dated the year after. This has puzzled most since the photo was discovered. Some say that the photo could have indeed been taken 1 year after the collision, as the inscription states, because the iceberg in this photo appears to be much smaller in height than other possible photographs of the iceberg in question. We're selling the piece. The letter that Captain Wood sent alongside the photo authenticates his own claims. In one section of the letter, Captain Wood writes, "I am sending you a sea picture. the Atenian running before a gale, and the iceberg that sank the Titanic. We crossed the ice tracks 40 hours before her and in daylight, so saw the ice easily. The notes on the inscription seemed to match the location that the Titanic's iceberg was originally located at, which goes a long way in establishing credibility in the photo. However, despite the overwhelming evidence that appears to validate Captain Wood's inscription, there have been other photographs of the supposed iceberg that have received a similar level of scrutiny. An example in 2015 from a black and white photograph of an oddly shaped iceberg resurfaced, and it is alleged that it was taken in 1912 by M. Lenenwald, chief steward of the SS Prinz Adel. In the note that he wrote to accompany the photo, he states, "On the day after the sinking of the Titanic, the steamer Prince Adalbert passes the iceberg. The Titanic disaster was not yet known by us." On one side, red paint was visible, which has the appearance of having been made by the scraping of a vessel on the iceberg. This photo is dated just one day after the sinking, and Leno Wenwald points to red paint visible on one side, which would have been left by the Titanic after the iceberg scraped along its hull and lower portions. All of this could be a sign that it is a more accurate representation of the infamous iceberg. However, other photographs of the iceberg in question have also emerged, including this photo. This shows the red paint along the edge of the iceberg. This photograph, however, is not attributed to anyone, and the specific location and time at which it was taken are still unknown. On the other hand, according to one of the auctioneers that handled the photograph captured by Captain Wood, his photo closely matches sketches that were made of the iceberg by one of the lookouts in the Titanic's crow's nest at the time. Their sketches both appear similar to the iceberg in this photo and have the same distinctive odd shape at the top. However, he then goes on to counter this claim, stating that despite the overwhelming evidence that confirms that the photo does in fact show the iceberg that sank the Titanic, it's impossible to know for sure. Therefore, finding a conclusive way to identify the specific iceberg that impacted the Titanic, taking over 1,500 passengers to their doom, remains to this very day elusive. The sinking of the Titanic, from Capsies to SS Carpathia, one of the most disturbing facts about the sinking of the Titanic is that the crew and the captain himself were all made aware of the icy conditions in the area. These conditions were, at the time, attributed to a mild winter. It was this winter that had caused large numbers of icebergs to drift off away from Greenland's western coast. It is thought that the iceberg which caused the Titanic to sink is one of Greenland's very own. The day before the collision and well into the night, the Titanic's radio generators received 6 consecutive warning messages about ice in the area. However, not all of these messages were relayed, and it's believed that this is due to the fact that the radio operator's primary responsibility was to send and receive passengers' messages with weather warnings pushed to the side. The first of the 6 warnings came from the RMS Corona, which was sailing some miles away, reporting bergs, growlers, and field ice. Captain Smith acknowledged his receipt of this message, but made no alterations to the ship's speed or direction. The second and third warnings came a few hours later in quick succession. First at 1:42 p.m. from the RMS Baltic, which warned of passing icebergs. This message was acknowledged by Captain Smith and relayed to Mr. Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line at the time. They deliberated for a while, after which the captain ordered for a new course to be set heading further south. The next message received by the Titanic was from a German ship, the SS America, just a few minutes later at 1:45 p.m. and warned them of their passing of 2 large icebergs. This message never managed to reach Captain Smith, so it was left unheard. The fourth and fifth warnings were received within an hour of each other, one at 7:30 p.m. and again at 9:40 p.m. from the SS Californian and the SS Mesaba respectively. Both ships ice and 3 large bergs in the area. Whether or not these messages were received, however, is still unknown. By the time that the last known warning was given, most passengers had retired to their bedrooms and the command of the bridge was handed to First Officer William Murdoch. The air temperature had fallen to near freezing and the ocean was completely calm. This would later be discovered to be a red flag sign of nearby pack ice, but was the time. The last and final warning was received at 10:30 p.m., just 50 minutes before the impact itself. This warning came from Cyril Evans, the operator of the SS Californian, which had halted for the night due to a heavy ice field some miles away. In response to this all-important final warning message, the captain simply urged the crew to continue at 22 knots as normal. According to 5th Officer Harold Lowe, this was completely justified, as the custom was to depend on the lookouts in the crow's nest and to watch on the bridge to pick up the ice in time. Contrary to this, according to Colonel Archibald Gracie, a survivor, the sea was like glass. With such calm waters and no visible sign of movement to give away approaching icebergs, the lookouts couldn't see any icebergs until it was too late. Collision at 11:30 p.m. There were two lookouts, Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee, standing guard within Titanic's crow's nest, 29 meters above the deck. The ocean appeared to be completely calm and unbroken in the dim light of the stars. Fleet was the first to notice a minimal haze on the horizon ahead, but did not make anything of it initially. Some say that this was a mirage provoked by the icy waters meeting the humid air, which temporarily blinded the lookouts. Just 9 minutes later, at 11:39 p.m., Fleet finally spotted the iceberg straight ahead in Titanic's path. He phoned the bridge to tell 6th Officer James Moody, who then relayed the message to Murdoch. Murdoch ordered the quartermaster Robert Hitchens to turn the ship hard starboard, which involved moving the ship's steering lever all the way to the right side, in what is now known as a vain attempt to turn the ship to port. Murdoch then attempted a port-around maneuver, in which the ship's bow would, in theory, swing around the iceberg, followed by the stern, so both ends of the ship would avoid collision. However, there was a 30-second delay before either order was carried out, and the task of putting the engines into reverse took a while to engineer. The center turbine could not be reversed, so the center propeller stopped, thus reducing the effectiveness and as a result the ship's ability to turn. Somewhat luckily, the Titanic changed direction in just enough time to avoid a head-on collision, but it still wasn't quick enough to evade the glancing blow. The bottom of the iceberg, hidden beneath the water surface, struck the ship along the side for several seconds. This jagged scraping left disconnected tears in the hull of the ship, allowing tons of water to pour into the lower bulkheads and storage compartments. Stewards in first class alongside many of the passengers first, second, and third class felt a prolonged shudder. Passengers on the lower decks and in their bunks in steerage and third class felt the impact far more directly. One of the firemen, George Kamesh, reported hearing a heavy third and grinding tearing sound, but none of the passengers had any idea of what had actually happened, because the stewards were told to tell them that it was simply a problem with the propellers to avoid panic. The ship flooded immediately, water pouring into the bulkheads at approximately 7 tons per second. The stokers and firemen in the boiler rooms were ordered to vent the boilers to send the boiling steam back up the funnel venting pipes. By this point, however, they were submerged in ice-cold water that was impossible to pump out fast enough. The lower decks of the Titanic were divided into 16 compartments, each separated by a bulkhead that ran. Each of these bulkheads could be sealed by watertight doors controlled remotely from the bridge. These took 30 seconds to close, with alternative escape groups administered so the crew would not be trapped. However, these bulkheads were not sealed at the top, and it is this design oversight which allowed the water to spill over into the 5 consecutive compartments starting from the bow of the ship. Unfortunately, the Titanic was only designed to be able to float with 2 to 4 compartments flooded. As a result, the 4 peak tank, 3 forward holds and 1 boiler room were left severely damaged, forcing the ship's bow to sink deeper and deeper into the water. Captain Smith felt the collision from his cabin and came to the bridge, where he immediately inspected the damage. He found that the forward cargo holds, mailroom, squash court, and the number 6 boiler room were all flooded beyond repair. He summoned Thomas Andrews, the long since that the Titanic was, in fact, extremely threatened. First lifeboats lowered. It took Captain Smith until 12:05 a.m. on the 15th of April, just over an hour, to finally make the order to uncover the lifeboats and muster all the passengers. Stewards were commanded to conduct door-to-door evacuations, routing the passengers and other crewmen, and direct them towards the boat deck. How thoroughly the passengers were checked and mustered was dependent on their class. First-class stewards were able to spend more time with each first-class passenger, reassuring them at great lengths and informing them of the right outfits to wear for chilly weather. To contrast, the second and third-class stewards were in charge of large numbers of lower-class passengers and were, therefore, unable to spend much more than a few seconds with each, mostly confined to opening doors and shouting at the passengers to put their lifebelts on. Even worse, the third-class passengers were mostly left to figure things out on their own and were simply told to go out to the boat deck. None of the passengers were told that the ship was sinking. At around 12:20 a.m., the lowering of the 20 lifeboats on board, including 16 wooden boats on davits and 4 collapsed boats, was finally underway. On average, each of these boats could carry up to 68 passengers, collectively carrying 1,178 in total. Barely half the number of passengers on board. However, the crew was unprepared for the emergency, having conducted just one lifeboat drill while they were docked at Southampton, and even this consisted of lowering just 2 lifeboats into the water. No further lifeboat drills had been conducted since the Titanic left Southampton. Unprepared and lack of training meant very few of the crew knew what they were supposed to do. Since they were not trained, seamen and thus had no experience. Rowing a boat. The first-class passengers were dealt with first since they were seen as the most important. However, the second and third-class passengers were furious, frantic and scared, and pushed through the barriers that the stewards had put in place to keep them trapped while they dealt with the first-class passengers above. Therefore, the boat deck became packed with passengers from all classes, and the resulting scramble was almost impossible to control. Captain Smith ordered that Second Officer Lightoller and Murdoch to put the women and children in and lower away. Lightoller took control of the port side boats while Murdoch commandeered the starboard boats. They both misinterpreted Captain Smith's orders. Lightoller took it to mean women and children only. Murdoch understood it as meaning women and children first. Lightoller failed to fill the boats to capacity. Leaving empty seats where men could have Saturday only allowed a limited number of men to board if all the women and children nearby had been transferred over. If all 20 boats were filled to their capacity, then an additional 500 passengers could have been saved. The final lifeboat that was launched was Collapsible D, which departed from the Titanic at 2:05 a.m. with just 25 passengers aboard. Captain Smith conducted a final tour of the deck before walking onto the bridge just as the ship took its final plunge. It's thought that he died there, as it was customary for every captain to go down with their ship. Titanic goes under by around 2:15 a.m. Enough water had begun to pour into areas that had not yet been flooded at an increasingly rapid rate. This caused the Titanic's bow to become fully submerged in the water, which, in turn, caused the stern to rise to an angle of 30 to 35 degrees. After some minutes, the ship's interior lights flickered before going out completely, plummeting the ship into total darkness. The Titanic stayed there for a few moments, appended in the water, only bobbing occasionally. However, the ship was being pulled apart by opposing forces. The flooded bow was being pulled down while her uplifted stern kept her at the water's surface. Not long after the ship's lights went out, the ship split into 2. The bow flooded rapidly, causing it to tilt completely upright before splitting from the stern completely and sinking down to the bottom of the sea while the stern bobbed on the surface for a few moments longer. At around 2:20 a.m., 2 hours and 40 minutes after the collision, the Titanic finally descended, leaving a trail of machinery, coal, and debris in its wake. The entire ship vanished from view within 6 minutes, before landing in its final resting place at the bottom of the ocean. Survivors recoup on the SS Carpathia. Out of the 2,224 passengers aboard the RMS Titanic, 1,500 passengers were not lucky enough to find their place in any of the 20 lifeboats that were used and thus later passed away in the freezing conditions. Only 360 bodies were later found. The remaining 705 passengers that survived found their way onto the lifeboats and were transported from the wreckage. These survivors were rescued by the SS Carpathia at around 4 a.m. on the 15th of April, which had steamed through the night at a considerable speed, dodging icebergs en route. Once the Carpathia arrived at the site of the sinking, it took several hours for all the survivors to be brought aboard. During this time, several of the survivors passed away just before the transfer between the lifeboats and the ship was made. Many of the survivors had to find inventive ways to board the Carpathia from their lifeboats. Some were strong enough to climb up the rope ladders that dangled down the side of the ship. Other adults were hoisted up in slings while the children were hoisted up in mail sacks. The final lifeboat to reach the ship was that of Second Officer Charles Lightoller, brimming with over 70 survivors. All the passengers that were rescued were on board the Carpathia by 9 a.m. There was a brief glimpse of joy when families separated by this tragedy were reunited at long last. However, in most cases, many passengers' hopes saddened as their loved ones failed to resurface. Before news of the Titanic's demise had reached the SS Carpathia, the ship was headed for Fjum, Austria-Hungary, now known as Rajka, Croatia. However, with limited medical facilities and the supplies to aid the survivors, Captain Arthur Rostron was to take a different course back to New York where the survivors could be properly looked after. Final thoughts to summarize and conclude, we must ask ourselves, what does this all mean and why was the RMS Titanic doomed to sink from the start? Some would argue that, because the ice warnings given on the day prior to the collision were ignored, this meant that the crew were unable to react and turn the ship accordingly within enough time. This theory is substantiated further by the fact that the binoculars equipped with night vision technology that the outlooks needed were left at Southampton in an accidental mix-up. This left them without the ability to see in the dark, and therefore they were unable to spot the iceberg well ahead of time. Others may argue that the crew themselves were responsible for the collision because they were ill-prepared, unprepared, untrained, and simply ineffective in their posts. The unloading and filling of the lifeboats were chaotic. On the morning of the collision, a second lifeboat drill was scheduled. However, Captain Smith cancelled this, and it is still unknown why to this day. If he had conducted this lifeboat drill, his crew might have been better prepared to handle such a catastrophic tragedy. And as a result, over 1,500 more souls might have been saved from the wreckage. But what do you make of these Titanic facts and discoveries